I knew something was wrong before I even pulled into my driveway. You ever get that feeling where your stomach drops for no reason, like your body notices the danger before your brain catches up? Yeah, that was me rolling back into Cedar Ridge Estates after 4 weeks recovering from back surgery at my sister's place in Scottsdale. I was exhausted, cranky, still moving slower than usual, and honestly all I wanted was to sit on my porch with a glass of iced tea and not hear another human voice for at least 2 days. But then I turned the corner toward my property and nearly drove my truck into the mailbox. My detached garage, the same garage my husband Frank built with his own 2 hands back in 1989, was covered in solar panels. Not one or two either. I'm talking a full commercial-looking setup, shiny black panels stretching across the roof like somebody had dropped a damn tech startup on top of my workshop. There were battery units bolted to the sidewall, fresh conduit lines running underground, even a digital meter glowing blue showing live energy output like it was some kind of miniature power station. And the part that really made my blood boil? The weather vane Frank installed before he died gone. Just gone. Replaced by some sleek little HOA-approved logo plate that read, Cedar Ridge Sustainable Energy Initiative, powering tomorrow together. Together. That word almost made me laugh. See, together in HOA language usually means we decided and you'll deal with it later. I got out of the truck slowly, staring at the roof like maybe I was hallucinating from pain medication, and then I noticed something else. The side garage door had a brand new electronic keypad lock on it. I walked over, punched in my old code, invalid. Tried the spare, invalid. At that point, I just stood there in silence for a second because anger like that doesn't hit all at once. It creeps up your spine nice and slow. Then I spotted the envelope taped to my front door. Congratulations. Always a bad way to start a letter when lawyers eventually get involved. Your property has been selected as the primary anchor site for the Cedar Ridge Community Solar Conversion Program. Selected. Like I'd won a raffle I never entered. The letter went on about environmental responsibility, shared energy efficiency, reduced grid dependence, all written in that fake cheerful HOA tone that sounds like a kindergarten teacher explaining taxes. Then I saw the signature at the bottom, Melissa Harper, HOA president. Of course, Melissa was one of those people who treated the HOA board like Congress. Mid-40s, always wearing expensive workout clothes, drove a white Tesla with a custom plate that said Echo Keen, and talked about sustainability the same way cult leaders talk about enlightenment. About 8 months earlier, she'd knocked on my door asking if I wanted to participate in a bold neighborhood transition toward renewable living. I told her no. Politely, too. I said I liked my garage the way it was. I wasn't interested in modifications, and I especially didn't want contractors on my property. She smiled, that tight little smile people use when they're pretending to respect your opinion while mentally calling you outdated. Apparently, no translated to try again later. What I didn't know was while I was recovering out of state, Melissa and the HOA board decided my garage was the ideal sun exposure point for their little energy experiment. My lot sits at the entrance of the neighborhood, 2 acres, elevated angle, uninterrupted sunlight, all afternoon. In other words, profitable. They didn't just install panels either. They connected my garage into a shared energy grid powering 16 homes in the subdivision. 16. My property had become the beating heart of their eco-friendly fantasy camp. And here's where things crossed from annoying into insane. They had contractors enter my locked garage, which meant somebody approved breaking into private property while I was gone. I called the HOA management office immediately. Straight to voicemail. Called Melissa. She answered on the second ring, sounding irritated, not guilty. "Oh good, you're back," she said, like she was expecting gratitude. I asked her one question, very calmly. "Why are there solar panels on my garage?" And this woman actually sighed before saying, "It's within the association's improvement authority under Section 8.4 of the Community Bylaws." Section 8.4. These people always hide bad behavior behind paperwork. I told her she had exactly 1 hour to explain how breaking into my property and replacing my locks counted as an improvement. Then she hit me with the sentence that changed the entire situation. "The neighborhood relies on that system now, Eleanor. Please don't overreact." Overreact. Funny thing about that word. People only use it when they know they crossed a line and need you to stay calm long enough for them to avoid consequences. I looked back at my garage, at Frank's missing weather vane, at those smug little blue lights blinking on the side battery pack. And right there, standing in my driveway with Arizona dust still on my suitcase, I decided if they wanted my roof so badly, they could learn exactly who owned it. Now let me pause the story for a second because this is where a lot of people get confused about HOAs. And honestly, that confusion is exactly how boards like this get away with crazy behavior in the first place. See, according to standard procedure, a homeowners association can absolutely regulate certain exterior modifications, paint colors, fencing, landscaping, roof materials, that kind of thing. Annoying? Sure. But legal in a lot of states if you sign the HOA agreement when you bought the house. What they cannot do, at least not without explicit written consent, easement agreements, engineering approvals, insurance liability transfers, and about 12 miles of legal paperwork, is physically occupy and monetize your private structure like it suddenly belongs to the neighborhood. That's not community improvement anymore. That's unauthorized use of private property. And once contractors entered my locked garage and changed access control, now you're dancing dangerously close to trespassing and civil liability territory. From a legal perspective, Melissa made the classic HOA dictator mistake. She confused administrative authority with ownership. Those are not the same thing. An HOA can fine you for leaving trash cans out too long. They cannot turn your garage into a miniature utility company because they held a board meeting and voted really hard about it. And psychologically? Oh, this is a beautiful little disaster. This is a psychological trap a lot of power-hungry neighborhood boards fall into. They surround themselves with people who all think the same way. They call it community consensus, and after a while they stop hearing the word no as an answer. They hear it as resistance that needs to be managed. Melissa genuinely believed she was the smartest person in the room because everyone around her kept rewarding her for being visionary. The problem is, people like that slowly stop seeing neighbors as individuals and start seeing them as obstacles, resources, or voting numbers. My garage wasn't sentimental property to her. It was sunlight efficiency. That's why she sounded annoyed instead of apologetic when I came home. In her mind, the project was already successful, meaning morally, she thought the ends justified the means. And trust me, that mindset falls apart real fast the moment money, lawyers, and consequences enter the room. The lesson here is simple. Whenever somebody in authority tells you don't overreact, what they usually mean is, please don't make me accountable. And Melissa Harper was about to discover accountability in the most expensive way possible. The first thing I did after hanging up with Melissa was call a locksmith. Not the HOA, not the police, not even my lawyer yet, because I wanted one thing established immediately: control. You lose control of your property, even temporarily, and people start acting like they're entitled to it forever. By 6 that evening, a guy named Raul was drilling out the electronic keypad they'd installed on my garage while I sat in a lawn chair with an ice pack on my back watching sparks fly off my own door like some kind of neighborhood coup cleanup operation. Raul kept glancing up at the solar panels and finally asked, "You know these things probably cost more than my truck, right?" I told him, "That's what makes tonight so interesting." Then I called my attorney, Dennis Cole, old-school property law guy, suspenders, drank terrible gas station coffee like it was oxygen. I explained the situation, and there was this long silence on the phone before he finally said, "Eleanor, are you telling me they built infrastructure on your property without a signed easement?" I said, "That's exactly what I'm telling you." He actually laughed. Not a nervous laugh either, a delighted, Christmas morning kind of laugh. "Don't touch anything yet," he said, "and absolutely do not sign a single document they hand you." Then came the utility company. Turns out, when neighborhoods create shared solar grids, somebody has to register production ownership and interconnection rights with the county utility office. Guess whose name wasn't on any authorization forms? Mine. According to standard procedure, utility infrastructure attached to private residential property requires direct owner consent. Melissa's board had apparently submitted HOA approval forms and hoped nobody important would ask follow-up questions, which honestly might have worked if they hadn't picked the one retired teacher in Arizona stubborn enough to turn revenge into a structured lesson plan. By the time the county inspector returned my call, things were already spiraling. He asked if contractors had entered the structure while I was absent. I told him yes. He asked if I had signed access agreements. No, Then he got very quiet in that government employee kind of way where you can practically hear paperwork multiplying in their brain. Around sunset, Raoul finally replaced the locks, handed me the new keys, and said, "Well, ma'am, it's officially yours again." I thanked him, walked into the garage, and there it was, the main inverter system mounted beside Frank's old tool cabinet. Bright green status lights blinking happily like the thing had no idea its entire future depended on the mood of a 68-year-old widow running on painkillers and pure spite. I stared at the breaker switch for maybe 10 seconds. Not because I hesitated. I just wanted to enjoy the moment properly. Then I flipped it. The silence afterward was almost poetic. No hum from the inverter, no blinking lights, no power flow. Just dead stillness. About 20 seconds later, the neighborhood reacted. Porch lights flickered. Decorative pathway lighting shut off all down the main street. I heard somebody outside yell, "What happened to the charging station?" Then my phone exploded. First came confused neighbors. Then irritated ones. Then full-blown panic. Apparently 16 homes were partially dependent on the shared solar grid during peak evening hours, and the sudden transfer back to standard utility draw overloaded several smart systems. Melissa called 3 times before I answered. She was furious. "What did you do?" she snapped before I could even say hello. I leaned against my workbench and said, "I turned off the electrical equipment installed illegally on my property." "You can't do that," she barked. "The community relies on that power." Community. There was that word again. I said, "Melissa, you broke into my garage, changed my locks, removed personal property, installed commercial-grade infrastructure, and connected half the neighborhood to my roof without permission. Let's not have a conversation about things people can't do." She tried switching tactics immediately. Okay, maybe communication could have been handled better. That sentence right there? Corporate speak for, "We know we're screwed." Then she added, "The board intended to compensate you." Intended. Future tense, meaning they never actually had. I asked how much my involuntary participation in their little climate revolution was supposedly worth. $200 a month, she said. I laughed so hard my back started hurting again. $200. They had installed roughly a $150,000 energy system on my property and planned to pay me less than a teenager makes babysitting. I told her the system stays off until every panel, battery, conduit line, and bolt gets removed from my garage. That's when the threats started. She warned me the HOA legal team would pursue damages if neighborhood residents suffered losses due to intentional service disruption, which sounded very intimidating until Dennis heard about it. He showed up the next morning carrying a folder thick enough to stop bullets. Melissa arrived 30 minutes later with 2 board members and some exhausted-looking attorney who already had the expression of a man questioning every career choice that led him to suburban solar warfare. We sat around my patio table while Dennis calmly laid out the situation. No easement, no owner authorization, unauthorized entry, illegal lock replacement, potential insurance violations, unregistered structural load modifications. At one point, the HOA lawyer literally removed his glasses and rubbed his face like he was developing a migraine in real time. Melissa kept trying to redirect the conversation toward community benefit, which is hilarious because once lawyers enter the room, morality becomes significantly less important than documentation. Finally, she asked what resolution I wanted. And this was my favorite part, because by then I'd had all night to think about it. I slid a printed sheet across the table. Option 1, I said, you remove the entire system within 30 days, restore my garage to original condition, replace the weather vane your contractors destroyed, cover all legal fees, and pay $50,000 in damages for unauthorized use. Melissa's face tightened immediately. And option 2, I smiled. You lease my roof. Dennis almost looked proud. I explained the terms slowly. $3,500 a month guaranteed for 5 years, annual structural inspections at HOA expense, full liability coverage, unrestricted access rights for me at all times, and 30% of all state renewable energy credits generated through the system. Plus one additional clause. Miss a payment by more than 72 hours, and I reserve the immediate right to disconnect the entire operation. Melissa nearly choked. That's extortion, I said. No, Melissa. Extortion is when somebody takes control of property that doesn't belong to them and profits from it. One of the board members actually looked down at the table because deep down they all knew she dragged them into a legal wood chipper. Negotiations lasted 3 hours. They offered $1,500, then $2,000, then $2,500 plus community appreciation incentives, whatever the hell that means. I didn't move an inch. Meanwhile, the neighborhood Facebook page had turned into pure digital warfare. Residents were furious their electric bills had doubled overnight after switching back to grid dependency. Someone leaked internal HOA emails showing Melissa pushed the solar project through before legal review because she wanted Cedar Ridge featured in a regional sustainability magazine. That's the thing about ego-driven leaders. Eventually, they start cutting corners because recognition becomes more important than process. For days later, Melissa resigned as HOA president. Didn't even finish her term. Rumor was several homeowners threatened independent lawsuits after realizing the board potentially exposed the entire neighborhood to liability claims. The interim president ended up being a retired electrical engineer named Walter Briggs. Quiet guy, practical, the type who actually reads contracts before signing them. He called me personally and his first sentence was, "Ms. Parker, we handled this horribly." See, accountability suddenly appears the moment competent people enter the room. Walter didn't argue, didn't posture, didn't talk about vision. He just asked what it would take to stabilize the situation and avoid further damage. 2 days later, they signed my agreement almost exactly as written. Today, those panels are still sitting on my garage roof. The neighborhood still brags about being environmentally progressive. And every single month, like clockwork, the HOA deposits $3,500 into my account plus my share of the renewable energy credits. Usually around another $700 or so, depending on production. Roughly $4,200 a month, generated by the same people who once thought no was optional. And the best part? The breaker box stays locked now. My lock, my key, my roof. Funny how quickly people rediscover the importance of property rights once the lights stop working. You know, the funny thing is, people keep asking me if I feel guilty about what happened to Melissa and the HOA board, and honestly, no, not even a little. Embarrassed for them maybe, sure, because the entire situation could have been avoided with one simple thing: respect. That's it. Respect for boundaries, respect for ownership, respect for hearing the word no without treating it like a challenge to overcome. And I think that's why this story hit such a nerve around the neighborhood after everything settled down, because deep down, everybody realized the solar panels were never the real issue. The real issue was entitlement dressed up as morality. That combination right there is dangerous. People will justify almost anything if they convince themselves their intentions are noble enough. Melissa genuinely believed she was improving the community, and maybe in some abstract way she was. Lower emissions, cleaner energy, reduced utility costs, all great things on paper. But once somebody decides the greater good matters more than individual consent, they stop acting like neighbors and start acting like rulers. That's where communities fall apart. From a legal perspective, this whole mess was a masterclass in why procedure exists in the first place. Paperwork isn't just annoying bureaucracy. It protects people from exactly this kind of overreach. Easements, permits, owner consent forms, liability transfers, those aren't technicalities. They're guardrails stopping ambitious people from bulldozing over everybody else because they think they know better. According to standard procedure, any HOA board with half a brain would have slowed this project down, consulted attorneys, obtained written agreements, and made absolutely sure homeowners voluntarily participated before touching private structures. But Melissa skipped all of that because she assumed success would erase the misconduct afterward. That's another psychological trap powerful people fall into all the time. They think outcomes matter more than methods. They think if the final result looks impressive enough, everyone will eventually forgive how they got there. Sometimes they're right, until they run into somebody stubborn enough to force consequences back into the equation. And the lesson here is bigger than HOAs, honestly. This stuff happens everywhere. Workplaces, families, neighborhoods, politics. One group decides they're smarter, more enlightened, more qualified to make decisions for everybody else, and slowly they stop asking permission because they start believing permission is inefficient. That mindset destroys trust faster than almost anything else. Here's the part that still makes me laugh, though. After all the drama, after the lawyers, the threats, the emergency HOA meetings, the Facebook civil war, the resignation, the neighborhood actually ended up getting what it wanted. They kept the solar system. They kept their sustainable energy project. The only difference is now they have to respect the person whose property made it possible in the first place. Funny how accountability tends to improve communication overnight. So let me ask you this. If you came home and discovered your HOA had transformed part of your property into a community project without asking, what would you have done? Would you have shut the power off immediately, sued them outright, negotiated like I did, or just tried to avoid the fight altogether? Because trust me, after this whole experience, I learned one thing very clearly. The moment people think your silence means permission, you better remind them exactly where the property line is.